Hey there, folks. This is Misadventurer here today with the 22nd developer diary for my Imperator overhaul mod project, Hegemony. Apologies up front as I am fighting a throat cold, so my voice may be slightly encumbered. This is going to be a quick overview of the alpha patch 0.7.1, which at the time that this video goes live, will itself have gone live on the Steam Workshop, so feel free to just skip this video and go straight into playing 0.7.1 with your own copy of Imperator and Hegemony. But if you want a video overview of the new content of this minor patch, as well as some sort of big picture discussion about what I'm going for with these changes, as well as what the post 0.7 patch cycle is going to look like, stick around because I'll be getting into all that over the course of this video. Now, 0.7.1 is the first in a series of minor patches that I'm releasing in the aftermath of 0.7's release, of course, a very large patch that I had a trio of enormous dev diaries going over all of the content of. Much of the post 0.7 minor patch cycle is going to be about essentially closing out Hegemony's alpha with the implementation of the last couple of systems or mechanics I didn't manage to get to by 0.7, but want to include in Hegemony in the alpha phase before we move on to the beta. The beta is going to be much more about scripting, and I don't want to necessarily leave any core systems unadded prior to the beginning of my scripting work, as scripting with core systems coming in midway could be quite easy to break stuff. So just wanted to quickly note that. I have talked about that before, though. Let's go ahead and get into it. Another thing as well is if you're actually playing Hegemony and have some experience now doing different campaigns or trying out different starts, I would really love to get your feedback about how the mod feels to play, what your experience has been like, and what you think works, and especially what you think doesn't work. This mod will live or die based on the feedback of playtesters, as I just don't really have the amount of time that I'd like to playtest the mod myself. Coding is quite time intensive, and I would really appreciate hearing from you about how this mod is going as a gameplay experience, as ultimately, no matter how cool the ideas I talk about sound kind of in the abstract, whatever I can say about them matters less than how they actually are implemented and how they actually are executed, and how they sort of translate to gameplay for a player. So if you could leave your feedback either in the comments of this video or any of my YouTube videos, or most helpfully on the Hegemony Discord, link in the description, I would really appreciate it. Also, just, sharing any fun stories or anecdotes from your time playing Hegemony, what sorts of crazy things your particular version of Classical Hellas got up to. Let me know those fun stories as well. Right, so let's go ahead and get into it. Now, the first thing to talk about with 0.7.1 is the beginning of a series of changes to begin to implement some unique mechanics for the Thracian chiefdoms in the north of the map. Now, the Thracian chiefdoms, if you don't really remember what's going on with these guys, have a fairly interesting starting situation that they all kind of share with each other. So for a bit of background about the lore here, in the context of the scenario of Hegemony, right, the start of the Peloponnesian War, there is a major participant who is not present on the map, and that's the Odrysian Kingdom, up here in the off-map areas of sort of central Thrace, right, Thrace. And the Odrysian Kingdom is most well known for their rivalry with Macedon, who is one of the sort of northern Hellenic countries or nations, which has a very deep hatred of the Thracians, particularly the Odrysian Kingdom, who has been a sort of geopolitical contemporary and rival of Macedon for a long time, and the context of the Peloponnesian War only deepens that. Now, the northern Hellenic world is not just comprised of northern Hellenes like Macedon. Now, of course, Macedon believes that their people are actually the descendants of the Argives, so arguably they're not northern Hellenes, but when you really, go back in time far enough, everyone in Hellas is, an immigrant from somewhere, right? I mean, originally everyone can trace their way back to like Ethiopia if you go far back enough. So we're talking about the context of the Peloponnesian War here and the way these different cultures think that they originate in different places. The point of it all is that the Macedonians, these northern Hellenes, have this long-standing cultural disdain for the Thracians and the Odrysian kingdom. Now, when the Parsons were forced out of Europe in the aftermath of the Second Parson invasion, a alliance of predominantly southern Hellenes, right, led by Attila and Lacedaemon, led the way, and that alliance actually freed the sort of satrapy of Thrace, and the aftermath of that resulted in the rise of the Odrysian kingdom. So the Odrysian kingdom actually formed after the Parsons left Parson-occupied Thrace, and they formed because of the efforts of the southern Hellenes. And this resulted in decades of the Odrysian kingdom's rise, and the nation that rised was fairly friendly to the southern Hellenes. And it's actually considered possible that the fairly significant southern Hellenic colonization of the Thracian coastline was tolerated or even kind of facilitated by the Odrysian kingdom's positive relationship with the southern Hellenes, and particularly with Attila, who of course played a large role in both the colonization of this coastline and in its sort of diplomatic situation, as this entire coastline is made up of Delian-aligned city-states. So, with all of that said, in the 430s and the 420s, in the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, the Odrysian kingdom has been friendly to the Delians, has been hostile to Macedon, but has remained fairly distant from direct Hellenic geopolitics. And the state of things for the various chiefdoms you can actually play as, because the Odrysian kingdom is not a playable country in my mod, but this frontier area along the coastline, where not the Odrysian kingdom directly, but these vassal chiefdoms of Thracians, right? The Odrysians are Thracians, and these chiefdoms are also Thracians. But these chiefdoms are not Odrysian, and this is kind of a distinct point to make. Think of it a little bit like, I don't know, Victorian-era Germany. You've got Prussians, and you've got other German groups. Now, you can collectively talk about the Germans as a collective of different cultures. You can talk about the role the Prussians play in sort of leading all of the different Germans. But when you're talking about, for example, I don't know that much about Germany. What's a German group that's not the Prussians? I don't know, the Bavarians, right? So imagine you're talking about the Bavarians of Victorian age Germany and their relationship to the Prussians. I don't know if the Prussians ever ruled over the Bavarians. I don't know anything. The point of this is that these different playable Thracian chiefdoms are chiefdoms of Thracian cultures that are under the overlordship of another Thracian culture, the Odrysian kingdom, that's off-map. And so, at the beginning of the Peloponnesian War, the Odrysian kingdom shifts from its traditional pro-Delian, anti-Macedon, but yet somewhat disconnected from direct geopolitics stance, to one that's a bit more active. They actually launch an invasion of Macedon, which is one of the reasons why Macedon actually joins the Peloponnesian League during the war. Not at the very beginning, but a bit later during the war, as a reaction to the actions of the Odrysian kingdom. And on top of becoming more actively involved in the Peloponnesian War, the Odrysian kingdom also attempts to formalize their relationship with Attila by becoming a Delian alliance, sort of similar to Corcyra, not part of the Delian League, but an ally of the Delian League from the outside, even more from the outside because they're not considered Hellenic. So the Odrysian kingdom, in the course of my mod, once I have all the scripting and stuff added in through the beta, will play some sort of role to reflect what they did in the historical direction of things. But where does that leave the Thracian chiefdoms, who, remember, are not Odrysian? These are other cultures, right? These are cultures who are part of the Thracian culture group, but are not Odrysian themselves. Well, these chiefdoms are expected to follow along with the decisions made by the Odrysian kingdom that they are subject to, right? These are vassal chiefdoms of the Odrysian kingdom, who, are considered to be kind of marcher lords, right? These sort of borderlands chiefdoms and tribes in the area at the edges of the Idrissian kingdom next to the Hellenic world. And so these chiefdoms may be happy to follow the orders of their Idrissian masters, but they might not be. And what I want to ultimately implement with the various Thracian chiefdoms is a system where they can either basically follow the Idrissian way, or they can fight against it. Not necessarily in the sense of joining the enemies of the Idrissian kingdom in the Peloponnesian War, which will eventually be Macedon and the Peloponnesian League, as Macedon doesn't like these Thracians any more than the Idrissian Thracians, but more so in a kind of unaligned way, where they basically say, we're not going to endanger our chiefdom by joining the Peloponnesian War at all. So essentially, in the context of these 7 Thracian chiefdoms that are vassals of the Idrissian kingdom, the act of neutrality is actually the act of rebellion, which is an interesting way to think about it. But essentially, the Idrissians are going to drag this borderland of chiefdoms into the Peloponnesian War against their will, and to finally fight for their independence from the Idrissians is to actually not get involved in the Peloponnesian War as an aligned belligerent. They could, of course, get involved as a neutral, unaligned belligerent, sort of like Argos. Now, in terms of the long-term picture of this, a lot of this is going to happen through scripting, missions, and events, so it's not in the mod right now. And with 0.7.1, what I've actually implemented is the first couple very, very minor steps of this long-term picture of how the Thracian chiefdoms are going to have an interesting kind of campaign direction along these lines. And the first step of it is their shared color scheme and their flags. Now, let me just quickly scroll through all the flags. You can see that they have a very similar flag design going on. And to explain really quickly what's going on here, when they are in the status of a kind of subject of the Idrissians, and this is not through a literal in-game subjecthood, like diplomatic status, because the Idrissians are not on the map, I'm going to actually design this very similarly to what I've done with the satrapy governments, where the government form itself restricts their abilities to represent their sort of big picture subordination without it being a literal diplomatic thing. But either way, while they're still part of the Idrissian kingdom's kind of frontier territory, under their sort of vassals still, right? They're not independent. Their flag is going to have this shared design where they have the tribe's actual animal sigil in a sort of pale white, ghostly, shrunken state underneath a looming Labaris axe head. Of course, this is the famous axe symbol of the Idrissian kingdom, basically hovering directly above them as if it were ready to fall and strike. Essentially a visual representation of the relationship between the chiefdom and the Idrissians, where the chiefdom is small, it's pale, it's weak, and it's underneath the power of the Idrissian axe. Because even though the Idrissians are not here, they're off map in the north, they have a far more centralized and powerful state who could very easily destroy any one of these chiefdoms if they tried to rebel. Now, in terms of how I'm going to have the gameplay of Thracian Rebellion and their different options, that's all coming in the future. I'm still working on exactly what that's going to look like. But the point of it is that these chiefdoms have remained part of the Idrissian sort of kingdom system for all these decades, not necessarily because it's better for them, but because it's going to be difficult to break out of it, right? They were conquered by the Idrissians initially, right, anyways. So if they do actually rebel, what is going to happen visually is their flag design is going to kind of switch from this sort of subject version to an independent version, where their actual animal icon will become centered, and their actual national colors will basically be reintroduced into the flag. It's going to be a colorful flag, sort of similar actually to the northern Hellenic flags over here. You can sort of get a sense of what this might look like. The Idrissian axe will disappear, and their national colors will also change. It's almost like becoming a formable in Imperator Rome, but it's actually to reflect them breaking free of the Idrissians. And so, essentially, the Idrissian, again, they're not actually in the game, but the Idrissian kingdom is sort of implied by this to have a black and gray color scheme with the axe head design. So that's basically what's going on with the changes to the Thracian chiefdoms. As you can see, at the moment it's all visual, but I do have a lot of ideas in the future, which some of which I'll be implementing over the course of the 0.7.x patch cycle to start to flesh out the Thracian chiefdoms. This is a fairly minor part of the mod, but it's a really interesting starting situation for a Peloponnesian War scenario to play as these sort of frontier Thracians who are in between the worlds of Hellas and the world of the Odrysian kingdom, and not necessarily eager to just follow the orders that they're being given by the Odrysians. They may have their own ideas for how to interact with the Hellenic world, possibly to basically, go full unaligned and essentially try to do a bit of a barbarian invasion if they can muster the strength for it, fighting against all of the Hellenes collectively and trying to rid the Thracian coastline of these pesky Delians, as well as the perfidious Macedonians, and sort of establishing a great sort of Thracian, tribal kingdom through their own effort, which would be an extremely difficult campaign given what they're up against. But yeah, just wanted to note that this is a long-term rework that I'm not trying to all squeeze into 0.7.1, as I don't want to overload what has been to be a minor patch. Right, so that concludes my quick, well, not so quick, coverage of the Thracian chiefdoms. Let's talk now about the rest of 0.7.1. Now, first things first, this next point is going to be a little tricky to explain completely, because it involves quite a bit of math. But basically, one other addition in 0.7.1 is I have actually rebalanced the way that research works. Now, it's a little hard to explain, but essentially, in summary, what I've done is change some of the code at the core of how the game calculates research to have the result that the research rates of a small city-state and a large city-state are both better, but the small city-state has less bad research than they did previously. So the effect of this is that the research system is less size dependent, which the way it works overall is that it's meant to prevent larger nations in the base game from having way better research, because research is a population resource system, in terms of population output system, I should say. So I basically have pushed the system further in the direction of being based on other factors than just sheer population size. And the result of my work, let me actually just pick a, I don't know, let's go with Antigonea over here. I'm going to hop into Antigonea. The result of this has been a sort of flattening of the research balance. So smaller city-states are no longer suffering through just miserable, poor research rates that they can't do anything about. Now, it's still not amazing, right? You still have a serious disadvantage as a small city-state, but it's a lot less severe, and I'm going to be continually introducing more ways over the course of this patch cycle to give smaller city-states especially a way to get research and start to progress their tech trees, as so much of this game's balance is built around the tech trees, and without access to it right from the beginning, you're going to be struggling. So, with just one tile city-state with presumably 24 population, it looks like it is, you're looking at 32% CRC, right? Current research capacity. If you don't remember how the research system works in Hegemony, it's actually pretty similar to the base game, but with my tooltips, I've tried my best to explain how this works, because it's very difficult to kind of understand, and it's essentially the point of the system, right? The key thing to understand is that your current research capacity is based off of a calculation that is considering the amount of research you're actually generating, as well as the number of your native population. And then this number, right, so 32.18%, is then interacting with your base research, which is, you can see in the research progress, to then create your effective research, as you can see here. And the, let me rephrase that. Actually, sort of explains it right here. Your your CRC is divided by 192 to create your base research. That's what I should have said. You can. I'm even getting turned around with my own system. Anyway, thankfully, these tooltips I wrote are pretty clear in this. So, anyways, the effective research is then increased by 10% per point of the assigned researcher's attribute. So then it's modified by the research speed. So the result of this is, for example, 0.30% per month. Now, the way that this all adds out tends to result in an amount per month that is similar to like 1/100th of this number. It's not exactly the same, but because of the way the math works, this number here, if you move the decimal over basically, 2 points to the left, you then get essentially, once added with research speed, the research progress, right? So 80 to 100% is going to give you a similar number, just 2 decimal points to the left. So that's a really quick way to think about it if you're not sure how this math works and don't want to try to figure it out, because it is quite complicated. The point of this is, though, 0.30% per month, that's 1% every 3 months, right? Which means 300 months in order to get 100%. Now, 300 months, let me actually pull out my phone here and do some quick calculations, because I'm genuinely not that good at math, despite coding in a game that is all about math. 300 divided by 12, that's 25. So we're talking about a 25 years to get one tech level situation. Now, keep in mind, this is for a single tile city-state with no positive modifiers applied yet, as once you have population happiness and population output, which comes from happiness as well, for your researcher pops, right, your Atastoi, Polites, and Metoikoi, this number is going to start to raise. So this is basically the worst level of research you're going to really see anywhere. Let me switch over actually to Atenai, who is meant to be one of the best researcher city-states at the start, to show you the comparison of what Atenai's CRC starts as. Again, keeping in mind that this is the least good CRC Atenai will probably ever have, as the game will give you more and more ways to improve your research as you go. So Atenai, in comparison to 32%, has 52%. So you can notice immediately, compared to pre-0.7.1, that the distance between a single city-state and the enlightened city-state of Atenai is actually not that large. It's a 20% difference. And keeping in mind, by the way, that Atenai has a lot to improve upon because they are so culturally diverse, right? Your native population, which is just Attidians, not the other Attic populations that Atenai has, is what's actually counting for that calculation. And so if you actually focus on culturally assimilating the people of Attica to be Athenians, or you improve the output of the researcher pops, this CRC will raise fairly quickly. So with that noted, Atenai is not actually seeing vastly faster research than other city-states. I'm going to continue adding in other mechanics over the course of these binder patches to give everybody more access to research rates, just to speed up the tech rate. I'm also going to probably, not in 0.7.1 because I haven't been able to figure out how to do this yet, but if I'm able to, I'm going to try later on to increase the number of inventions, or I should say innovations, that getting a tech development level actually rewards, as opposed to just one per level for every individual different tech system, just because there's so many technologies, and in the base game, with a research-oriented noble strategy, right? I'm thinking like my old Domasek campaign, where I basically oriented my entire civilization in that one to be all about research gain. I still was not really like maxing out my tech trees even into the late game, and that was with a ridiculous noble desired ratio strategy. So I think, given that I've created tech trees that are the same size or larger than the base game, but have more importance in the game's balance, increasing the rate that you gain innovations is probably necessary, but I haven't implemented that in 0.7.1. I'm just thinking about it, so I wanted to quickly note that. So, with the research stuff talked about, let's get into the final part of this dev diary, and the one that I'm the most excited to talk about because it involves a system that I've been working on for, at this point, almost a year, and was one of the first original ideas I had for Hegemony, which is the priority system. Now, the priority system is not fully complete. This is the first phase of its implementation. I actually initially wanted to have 8 possible priorities per category, with the latter 4 being locked behind tech levels, which is probably still what I'm going to do. But for now, I've not really had the time to fully implement that many. So what I actually have instead is 4 per level, all of which are custom, and actually have custom icons. I've created these icons myself using other parts of Imperator Rome's graphics assets. These are all sort of snapshots from different Imperator Rome images, so if these all look familiar or feel appropriate to the Imperator Rome aesthetics, that's because they are coming from other parts of Imperator Rome, mostly from event pictures and whatnot. And along with custom icons, all of these priorities have custom effects, and I'll talk a bit about what they all do, and about the big picture idea with the priority system. Now, keep in mind that there's going to ultimately, by the end of the alpha, be probably 8 priorities per category, with the later 4 all being locked behind tech progression, and providing more complex bonuses that may not be as universally useful, but might be more situationally useful. Things like adding mercenary capacity, army movement speed, that sort of thing. So these initial 16 priorities are meant to be kind of base core priorities that you would probably consider very competitive with each other at all times, but may not be as sort of situational in those senses. So I wanted to make sure that to start with, all the priorities, especially within each set of 4, felt competitive with each other as something that you may actually want to go for. Now remember that the way the priority system works is it is completely free to change your priority. There's no cost either in authority or any other resource, or in time. There's no cooldown. You can basically shift these at will, and you're going to want to as you are reacting to what's going on in your campaign. Now, to get into it, let's first talk about and also one more thing to note as well, is that if you line up your 4 priorities, you get your base monthly authority +1. This is quite important as a way to gain your 1 authority per month minimum. This allows you to avoid getting into the religious developments tech tree and start gaining cult influence. As I've talked about previously, you may not want to gain cult influence, especially as a polyarchy, where you're going to start to see party approval problems from that, aside from the theocrats. And there are some other ways to gain authority as well, and I'll talk actually a bit more about this when it comes to the priority system specifically. But your sort of default way to gain authority is with the priority system to get these all matched up. Plus, this incentivizes you to batch them up, as I've not really balanced these, assuming that you're going to mix and match them outside of the 4 categories. You are certainly able to, but you're missing out on a very powerful +1 monthly authority that I don't really think there's any strategy where mismatching the priorities is better than matching them to get the 1 monthly authority with no cult authority, or excuse me, cult influence coming with it. So let's go ahead and talk about the priorities. First, with the military priorities, we've got extol the epilektoi. Some hoplite distinguish themselves as epilektoi, the elite. The others respect them, and if we hope to keep them from getting ideas, we should make a show of respecting them too. Morale of armies plus 25%. You can see immediately the sheer scale of these priorities. These are bonuses you do not want to miss out on if you know that they're going to be helpful to you. I want this to be a system that everyone wants to interact with as much as possible to min-max their bonuses situation by situation. The next priority is display strength at sea, 25% morale of navies. The fool assumes that naval warfare is a matter of battle between ships. The wise understand that feints, misdirection, and power projection are the way to victory at sea. Next up is repurpose the ruins. Hellas is covered in ruins from ages gone by. Why quarry new stone when all it takes to maintain our fortifications is a little inventiveness and a lot of displacement? 25% reduced fort maintenance, which, by the way, fort maintenance is a major drain on your economy, especially as a nation with more territory, because every single city actually counts as a fort in Hegemony. So don't overlook the power of fort maintenance reduction. It could really save you a lot of money. Finally, from the military priority section, call for oinoi. Oinoi are birds whose movements reveal the will of the gods to our priests, or so they say. Nonetheless, our citizen soldiers yearn to hear that victory is assured in the battles ahead. This grants you 25% Army and Navy morale recovery. This will help quite a bit in either preparing for a battle without full morale set up already, or recovering from a battle to protect your army from getting stack wiped or otherwise having problems with morale. Moving on to economic priorities, we start with Enforce the Letogoria. The Letogoria is traditionally a voluntary donation, but in these times, we can't rely on our polities to make the choice for ourselves. It's time to ask somewhat more sharply. 25% national tax. Now, this is pretty funny because the Letogoria was actually genuinely appears to have been a completely voluntary system, but I can completely imagine that on occasion the Athenian leadership decided to put the pressure on a little bit about these donations. So anyways, now moving on to encourage the kapaloi. The kapaloi are merchants who make the barter and sale of their goods their full-time occupation. So long as they keep the commerce flowing, they have a place in our polis. 25% national commerce income from them. Next up is work to resolve stasius. Stasius, factionalism, and political gridlock, is a familiar problem in any Hellenic polis. While we may never escape it, our polis would benefit were we to prioritize its prevention. This gives you base, nationwide pop realignment speed and pop assimilation speed. Quite a handy tool in order to get perhaps a multicultural and multi-aligned population to adhere to the one way. Finally, for the economic priorities is invest in our theorioi, which is research 100%. Oh my gosh, my throat is killing me. Theorioi, our sacred ambassadors, our polis is expected to dispatch to participate in the shared planning of religious games. They are well placed to report back what they observe abroad. Now, 100% research may sound quite extreme, but this is actually balanced around, again, the way that the research calculation works. So the actual research amount that you have is not everything. It's severely undercut by your ratio of research to native population. So this bonus is going to be better for larger nations who have a higher research output to work with. So just with Atenai as an example, we're 52% CRC right now. So let's go ahead and throw on invest in our theorioi to see how things are looking now. 100%, so they're looking a fair bit better. And again, as Atenai, we're getting the most benefit from this bonus. In fact, so now we're looking at 0.98 per month, 1% per month. That is 100 months, which is 100 divided by 12. Let's see. 8 years, 7 or 8 years per research progression rank. Let me actually quickly do a little bit of cheating to give myself some text, just for demonstration purposes. So I can go ahead and grab Philosophia 1 to get a bit more research capacity. Alright, so with 10% population happiness reduction, keeping in mind that that's changed it as well, we're around 106% just from getting invest in our theorioi from 50%. Now, keep in mind, 100% research is, and the math of it is not exactly the same, but it is basically doubling what your CRC was previously. It's not always exactly a doubling, but this is going to get you closer to or above that 100% starting maximum research capacity. So just wanted to note that this does work, and it works quite a bit. So this is my other way in this first patch to address the research gain rate problems with 0.7, as I want to make sure that my research system that I've spent a lot of time setting up is a big part of everyone's playthrough, and I would rather have everyone gaining lots and lots and lots of research they can use to creatively build their particular playthrough and campaign, as opposed to just sitting around with no research, looking, wistfully at my tech trees, wishing that you could engage with the system. I want to make sure you all can. So that is what Invest in Our Theorioi is doing. Moving on to the cultural priorities, we first have Honor the Strategoi with +10 loyalty of generals. The Strategoi hold a simple kind of power, men who follow them into battle, and who may thereafter follow them into rebellion against us. We must keep our Strategoi under control. Next up is subsidize the Triarchia, loyalty of admirals +10. The Triarchia is not popular with the polities, inflicted with assignment to it, and this discontent could easily disrupt our control of the Navy. We must prevent that. If you don't remember, because I talked about this all the way back with the military tech tree, the Triarchia is a pretty interesting part of Athenai and possibly some other city-states, where basically control over the Navy was assigned as a kind of reverse lottery, where it was a lottery to do something you didn't want to do, basically a drawing by lot, where a citizen was assigned the job of paying for the Navy, right, and paying for the equipping of triremes, based on whether they were wealthy. So if someone got picked randomly to be the Triarch, they could actually petition the state to basically declare that they were too poor to do it, and so it would be reassigned to somebody else. There's actually a fairly complex, like, civil system, kind of trial system to basically investigate whether someone was actually too poor to be in charge of the Navy. So it's a very weird system, basically. But imagine, your luck is that because Athenai assigns people to different governor positions historically by lot all the time, and the one that you get is to be the guy in charge of paying for the Athenian Navy. That would suck. Anyways, moving on, we've got assuage the Archontes. Relying on Archontes to govern regions of our polis has exposed us to their discontent, though as long as they feel like insiders to our efforts, they may yet remain true. This gives you +10 loyalty of governors. This is an example of a priority that may not be really important to every single playable city-state, as many of them don't have large enough territory to have multiple governors. Athenai does start with multiple regions under their control, or sections of multiple regions. They could actually benefit from this once governors are assigned. Lastly, for the cultural priorities, is denounce hubris. Hubris is the irreligious aspiration to rival the gods, which more importantly could also lead one to rival us. We would do well to denounce this trait and any who display it. This is a nationwide monthly ambition minus 0.2, which, if you remember how my character system works, ambition gain is a pretty serious problem. Now, having a good pretennis, as I talked about in a previous dev diary, this is the office rework, is going to help a lot with keeping ambition down. But if you don't have a good pretennis, or you actually just have such severe ambition gain, especially later in the campaign when everyone's popular, you may want the extra ambition reduction, and 0.2 reduction is pretty large, to keep everyone's ambition down. Keeping in mind that, again, ambition causes an extreme gain to character wages, among other things. Right, moving back over to priorities, we finally have the religious priorities. First, we've got celebrate the Parson invasions, 100% control and diplomatic range. The Parson invasions of Hellas are seen to have demonstrated the superiority of Hellenes over all other peoples. Nonsensical propaganda, of course, but popular with our people. Next up is court wealthy pilgrims. Why foreign pilgrims deign to visit our holy places we may never be sure. Nonetheless, something draws them. Given the coin they bring, that something should be us. Tribute income plus 25%. Now this is probably a pretty good option for Athenai again, given Athenai's enormous reliance on its Delian League to pay for their navies, among other things. So let me just throw on the tribute income bonus here, see how that affects my starting economy here. Pretty good. Yeah, definitely a nice boost. Anyways, moving along, we've got glorify the polis, plus 25 at dip rep. Whether by ascribing the history of our polis to the acts of a god or personifying her as a god directly, which is something that some of these city-states actually did, divine favor is a byword for standing in the Hellenic world. Lastly is guide the cults. This is probably the most interesting priority of the 16, given its relationship to the core mechanics of cult influence and authority. This, sort of similarly to the first tech in the religious development's tech tree, provides a sort of combination +1 authority, but also +1 monthly cult influence. The many cults in our polis hold real political power we could control if we guided their efforts. However, strengthening the cults is sure to cause problems down the road. So this is sort of the opposite of doing the challenge the cults action, which, for the cost of 12 authority up front, reduces your monthly cult influence by 1. which, given there's 12 months per year, means you're basically spending 12 authority to remove 12 cult influence. And as I've talked about before, I want to generally force you to gain more cult influence in order to gain more authority, given that authority is the most important resource, sort of like PI that it replaced, in engaging in diplomacy and lots of internal management stuff. So essentially, if you want to either go for a high cult influence strategy, or just gain more authority and just suffer the consequences of higher cult influence, you can shift in to guide the cults for any monthly tick in order to get that extra boost. I like that because of how the priority system works. You don't need to commit to this the entire time. This is not something that requires a lot to change. I can just, now I've got +1 authority and +1 cult influence, but not anymore, now it's gone. But because cult influence and authority are both monthly tick mechanics, I can't cheese this to not get cult influence, or I guess to just get it if I was for some reason specifically not wanting authority. But basically, if I'm going to get the +1 authority, I have to have this in effect for the monthly tick, which means I'm also getting the +1 cult influence alongside it. So that wraps up the gameplay impacts of the priorities, and if you've been particularly paying attention and you have an eagle eye, you may have noticed something interesting about the priority system. I'm actually super excited to reveal this because this is a cool idea that I had while working on these 16 priorities, which is that there's a bit of an interesting recurring pattern with these priorities. And this is going to be relevant specifically if you're playing as a polyarchy. This is not implemented yet, so everything I'm about to tell you is what's coming later in the post 0.7 patch cycle, as well as the beta phase where I'm going to be working on scripting. Essentially, these 16 priorities represent military priorities, economic priorities, cultural, and religious priorities. But it's not just a matter of 4 per category. This is actually an XY grid of the party preferences too, because the first priority for each of the 4 categories has a militaristic element, right? We start with extol the epilakoi, enforce the liturgia. It implies, especially with the picture, some sort of martial action. Honor the strategoi, you're honoring the generals. Celebrate the Parson invasion, a fundamentally martial, warlike celebration. The second category has plutocratic implications, right? Displaying strength at sea, something that the merchants would like. Encourage the kapoloi, something the merchants would like. Subsidize the triarchia, something the merchants would like. Court wealthy pilgrims, something the merchants would like. The third category has civic and political implications. Repurpose the ruins, right? You're digging around in the history of your own city-state, something that the ideologues would like. Work to resolve stasis, something that literally, directly, the ideologues care about. Assuage the Atacantes. These are political appointments that have political power, not military power, something the ideologues care about. Glorify the polis, need I even say it? And the fourth, column has religious implications. Call for oinoi, a religious action. Invest in Arthuroi, a religious institution. Denounce hubris, a religious action. Guide the cults. Believe it or not, a religious action. So this is not just a matter of 4 sets of purely military, economic, cultural, and religious priorities, but there's this overlapping system of each of these sort of having a sort of sub-implication or a sub-meaning, which plays into how this is going to work when it comes to polyarchies. Because one of the main things that I want the party events and the faction events in polyarchies to do is I want the factions to actually want you to adopt the kinds of priorities that they have, right? And so this is not just a case of the theocratic faction asks you to shift around your religious priority among the 4, because the way the priority system works is that there's 4 slots, and each slot has one category that fits for it, and within each category there are 4 options. It's not just about, oh, the theocrats want you to have a religious priority, because you're already going to have one. What they're going to want you to have is the religious priority, and they're also going to ask you to have the religious cultural priority, and the religious economic priority, and the religious military priority. So because these priorities have sort of sub-categories just naturally with the way that I've designed these, the parties are going to constantly pester you to change your priority of one of the 4 categories, not just the one that they line up with, to be the sub-category one that they like, right? For example, say that you are focusing on denouncing hubris, right? The theocrats may not really ask you to change that because you're doing something that has a religious implication despite it being a cultural priority. However, if you're playing as an oligarchy, the aristocrats might say, you know what, we think you need to work on assuaging the out of contest. That's what we care about. So we're going to demand that you change your priority to this and keep it there, maybe for a monthly tick or some other system. And if you don't, we're going to lose approval, right? So basically, this priority system, which you're able to switch around super easily, you're also going to be forced to switch around in reaction to the party politics of your city-state as a polyarchy. And I want to see if there's a way to implement something like this for other kinds of governments, but I've designed this with polyarchies in mind first and foremost. And this is a very different way to think about priorities than what I've done previously. But I think it's a really cool idea, and it creates a direct sense of your polyarchy campaign, right, democracy or oligarchy, being really driven by the interactions with the parties. Now again, this entire idea of the parties asking you to change your priorities and getting mad if you change them back is not in the mod yet. This is all just kind of plans for the future. But I've built this priority system with these first 4 in each category with this particular system in mind for what I'll put in later on during the beta. And once I add in more priorities, which again are not going to be as sort of baseline, they're going to be more specialized, those priorities are not going to be part of this system. They're going to be more kind of generic, you know, just purely economic oriented, purely cultural oriented, so on and so forth, and not really play a role in this dynamic, as actually coming up with, like, for example, 2 instead of 1 category and subcategory appropriate, you know, sort of framing and design and image and modifier is just too much to deal with. So these first 4, even once I have more of them, will sort of work within this kind of subordinate mechanic, the subordinate system of party interloping, which should be pretty interesting to navigate, and dramatically expand the amount of flavor events where, for example, I can write an event, right, where the theocratic faction wants you to stop focusing on actually being good at war and focus on the performative religiousness of war, which is the sort of thing that they care about. Whereas the Stratocrats are going to want you to switch from being focused on guiding the cults, being good at religious stuff, and focus to the performative religious stuff that's all martial, right? So you can sort of see how this kind of, you know, grid of different priorities allows me to do some really interesting stuff with the narrative of Hegemony's party events. And this is very much a mod that I want to have a deep level of immersion, I mean, obviously, but also of roleplay opportunities. So if you're trying to really play politics in your city-state, which my gameplay systems are meant to require you to in order to be good at playing as a democracy or oligarchy, you need to really think about how the parties may react to you changing your priorities in a way that may offend them or prompt them to ask you to change them back for a few months. So anyways, that basically wraps up the overview of 0.7.1. Let me actually check really quick if I neglected to mention anything. I don't think I did. Let's see. Oh yeah, one more thing that I've done, which is not very easy to show, but you could just take my word for it, is I have gone through and cleaned up the localizations in all of the names, both for the Hellenic and Thracian cultural names, mostly just to remove all of the letters C and replace them with Ks. So let me just actually go into my character list here. If you just, you know, pause the video when I'm scrolling around here, you'll see that every single character who could have a C in their name previously, that letter is now a K. I did this manually for all of the different hegemony cultures. And I also did it for the Thracian name set, because the Thracians actually have their own name set, different from the Hellenes. And I'll be maintaining that localization approach for all of the character names in the mod beyond just those cultures. So that actually wraps up this dev diary. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.